Another driver who's covered by car insurance from More Than, sponsors of Fifth Gear.
The James Bond films celebrated their 40th birthday this year with their recently released Die Another Day. But for the next hour, we're going to forget about the secret agent's licence to kill, because where would 007 be without his licence to drive? Bond's amazing collection of gadget-laden cars has been a key factor in driving the secret agent's antics into cinema history. And in this Fifth Gear special, we take a look at the phenomenon that is the Bond car.
On the 7 Bonds I was involved with, the Bond car played a very important part.
I think it's one of those things that get kind of evolved, you know, what could this car do?
I think the way we shoot these films, the audience feel they're in the driver's seat, which is, you know, what we really try and do.
Now, pay attention, 007.
I never joke about my work, 007.
Fully loaded, I think is the term. Grow up, 007.
For the last 4 decades, long-suffering Q has been handing over the keys to some of the most significant vehicles in cinema history. Unfortunately, very few have ever made it back in one piece.
Have I ever let you down?
Frequently.
Q's not gonna like this.
Where's my Bentley?
Oh, it's had its day, I'm afraid.
But it's never let me down.
M's orders, 007. You'll be using this Aston Martin DB5 with modifications.
The Bond car legend began in 1964, when the producers of the third film, Goldfinger, decided that the Bentley specified in Ian Fleming's early novels was too old-fashioned, and so chose what they considered to be the sexiest British sports car of the day. This inspired piece of casting was arguably the most successful product placement in cinema history, and Bond's DB5 became the most famous car in the world. But it also very nearly didn't happen.
The boys went off to see whether Aston Martin would play ball. All I heard reports were that they were very reluctant to give us, I mean, I'm sure they asked for 3 cars, one for the road, one to bugger around with, and one for special effects.
I don't know that we didn't think it was much of an idea to put our cars in films, a little bit in for a dig.
They were not at all happy about it, you know, how much you're going to pay and it's going to cost so much and so on. And I said, well, I can't deal with the financial side, but I leave that to the producers.
They wanted us to give them a couple of cars. We, on the other hand, wanted to sell them a couple of cars, but they didn't take much to that either.
At that stage in the proceedings, I was very disinterested whether it was a Ferrari, an Aston Martin, a Jaguar, or whatever. Please make your minds up, because we've got a lot of work to do on the car.
And they very reluctantly agreed to let us have 2 Astons, one for the normal driving and one to be fitted with all the gadgetry.
We've installed some rather interesting modifications. You see this arm here? Now open the top, and inside are your defense mechanism controls. Smoke screen, oil slick, rear bulletproof screen, and left and right front wing machine guns.
Well, the gadgets came out of my own frustration as a sports car driver, because I had one of the first E-types at the time. And on numerous occasions, I had you know, damage done to the car and never found out who did it. So it was a form of getting my own back, in a way.
We kept on thinking of what else could we add, and everybody put in their penny's worth.
They came in and they said, well, you know, this is what we visualise. They never said this is what we want done, because in some instances you couldn't actually do it, you know.
Now, pay attention, please. Windscreen bulletproof, as are the side and the rear windows. Revolving number plates, naturally. Valid all countries.
My contribution was the revolving number plates, because I was getting an enormous amount of parking tickets, and there was this sort of, and I could imagine a meter maid, you know, being absolutely beastly and filling in her thing, and as I drove away, I would flip a switch and the numbers would change.
Whatever we did had a tongue-in-cheek element about it, and so, you know, I came up with the overriders like boxing gloves and the forward and rear firing machine guns.
You never got drawings, you never got measurements, you never got... you just got sketches as to what they visualised would happen. And in most cases, they were feasible. Costly, lengthy, but feasible.
The brilliant special effects engineers on Goldfinger managed to turn most of the production team's ideas into reality, and the DB5's concealed weaponry stunned filmgoers of the time. The main car chase, supposedly around Goldfinger's factory in Switzerland, but in fact filmed in and around Pinewood Studios, remains one of the most memorable Bond car sequences ever, and includes one of the most famous stunts in the whole of cinema.
You know, it's very difficult when you think back how many years, it's nearly 40 years, over 30 years, to think who came up with the ejector seat. Mm-hmm.
Ejector seat? You're joking.
I never joke about my work, 007.
I think I probably had quite a lot to do with it because of my experience as a pilot in the Air Force, you know.
I don't know who came up with it, basically, but again, it was, why would you have an ejector seat in a car?
It appealed to all of us. I mean, there was no discussion, no argument. It was just the way, how can we make it work?
It was quite a big hole we had to cut in the roof. When you're looking at a car, which is one heck of a lot of money, to cut a hole in that sort of car is, well, it's criminal, really, but we had to do it.
Always in the writing of the script was finding a reason, so that obviously a villain says, Mr. Bond, drive where I tell you to, and that's where an ejector seat would be very good, because then you would, said certainly, press the button and the guy would fly out.
Having just withdrawn from the international motorsport arena, the Bond film provided the perfect platform for a bit of prestige marketing. It just so happened that the DB5 was one of the best Astons ever built. It was beautiful to look at and brilliant to drive. The combination of the two doubled production overnight.
It had a staggering effect. And in the end, we couldn't make DB5s fast enough.
We had no idea of the success that the Aston Martin was going to have and all the gadgets were going to have, so that it was, we knew it was fun, but that it was going to become historical, we had no idea.
The sales of Aston Martin went up by something like 50% or even over. And after that, I never had any more problems getting cars for a Bond film.
The success of the DB5 in Goldfinger and the brief appearance of other Astons in subsequent films seem to have established a permanent tie between 007 and Aston Martin. But in 1976, another rather more radical British sports car was brought to the attention of the producers, who were instantly smitten. For The Spy Who Loved Me, James Bond would drive a Lotus Esprit. By 1977, there was a new Bond. Roger Moore had taken on the role and in 2 films had yet to receive a specially modified car from Q.
Wait a minute.
But in The Spy Who Loved Me, he eventually got his very own white Lotus Esprit S1.
Good morning, Major Boothroyd.
Morning, Major.
Look what Q's brought for us. Isn't it nice?
We had decided we have to give Bond another and the latest British sports car again.
Legend has it that Lotus chairman Colin Chapman was tipped off that a new 007 car was being sought, and so had one of the very first Esprits parked outside the Bond production offices. The producers spotted it and were instantly smitten.
Colin Chapman was wonderful because he said, you know, if there's any backup, I've got the plane, mechanics. People went out there to look after it, you know, because they were, you know, they were quite sophisticated cars. You know, they were 4-cylinder but turbocharged, and they wanted looking after.
One day I was invited into the chairman's office and said and told, you're visiting Sardinia for 3 weeks and you're taking 2 cars down there and you're going to be helping the latest James Bond film. My brief was to follow the film crew around, educate the film crew on the car, make sure that the car fitted the scene and that the stunt driver was able to get the best out of the car.
But getting the most out of the brand new Esprit was easier said than done. Lotus had handling capabilities far beyond what the average stunt driver had been used to, and the one behind the wheel in Sardinia was struggling to find the limit.
The second unit director became somewhat disillusioned by the fact that the car didn't look as though it was going as fast as the scene dictated. By some fluke or accident, whatever you like to call it, I happened to drive the car when the second unit director was getting particularly upset, and just drove the car as it could be driven, and he said, "That's how I want the car driven." And from there on in, I was pretty much behind the wheel most of the time. The favourite scene is the, and most exciting for me, was the one driving underneath the helicopter. I had to round a corner as fast as the car could go, lots of explosions going on around me, and then in front of me was the helicopter pointing at me, and closed my eyes and went underneath it. A 3-week exercise turned into a 7-week exercise purely and simply because everybody started to think of new ideas and new scenes, and bits got added in here, there and everywhere, and it was good. You know, it was something that 25 years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday.
Good though the driving was in The Spy Who Loved Me, mention James Bond's white Lotus Esprit to most people, and they'll immediately think of just one thing.
Can you swim?
I did some sketches of the Lotus as a submarine, and as always happened, I found in the Bond that, you know, I came up with ideas and sketches, but then there was always somebody, and I never believed it possible, who managed to make all these things work.
Derek Millins was the visual effects supervisor, and he made several copies of the Lotus, the underwater Lotus.
There were three bodies where the wheels folded in, and then there was one where the little wings came out, and then there was one where the flaps came down. Believe it or not, it's mostly done with broomsticks.
The people inside, you know, who were operating the car underwater are actually in water. They're not. It's not dry because, you know, we couldn't really pressurize it or keep the water out.
Everybody had to learn to work underwater, and it was unbelievable to watch riggers with steel tubes, you know, swimming underwater.
Suddenly the water goes from being like 30 feet deep. You go over the edge and it's like bottomless, you know, it goes down about 5,000 feet. Occasionally they get the balance wrong and they go over the drop-off, and there's a moment's panic where they're basically trying to get the thing up again, you know.
Derek Meddings made kind of two models. There was a 1/4 size and then the small one, of course, how to get the bubbles. And at that time he used an Alka-Seltzer tablet.
He believed in simplicity, so we were shooting the scene on a beach in Sardinia. And the sea was extremely calm and clear in Sardinia. And he just towed the Lotus out of the water onto the beach. And then we replaced that same Lotus with a driving Lotus, and the Lotus drove up.
The Lotus was the only car during the Roger Moore era to be supplied by Q. But during that time, Bond had plenty of less conventional ways to show off his driving skills. The Spy Who Loved Me was a great success, and the role of the Esprit certainly one of its highlights. But by 1987, a new actor would play the part of Bond, and everything was to be done to smooth the transition from Roger Moore to Timothy Dalton. The choice of a new Bond car was hugely significant.
Right, bring it down slowly, gently now.
Morning, Q.
Oh, morning, Governor.
The most difficult thing to do is to introduce a new James Bond. And when Timothy Dalton came along, it was very important that we went back to the roots of Bond. And one of the fantastic things about Bond is the Aston Martin. The Aston Martin people were wonderful to us. They were very keen themselves, because I think the company had been brought by the management at that time, and they were keen to re-establish the mark in the eyes of the world, you know, and it suited us as well, because we wanted to re-establish the Bond identity with the Aston Martin, so it was a happy marriage.
The script dictated that Bond's V8 Vantage should appear not only in its saloon form, but also as a soft top. So, keen to please, Aston Martin chairman Victor Gauntlet loaned them his own rare convertible.
The idea was that we would use Victor's car as the open car.
Good morning, sir.
Then we would go into Q's workshop and then we'd winterize it.
Morning, Q.
Oh, morning, Governor.
You find it in Q's workshop with a couple of bods holding over the back with the hood down, a sort of hardtop looking thing. And it then gets transmogrified into a saloon. How you explain the rear quarter lights and all the rest of it, well, you're not meant to ask.
It had now been 10 years since Bond fans had been able to watch Q talk 007 through the latest gadgets on a new car. But with the Aston Martin Vantage in the living daylights, the wait was finally over.
We began to devise an action sequence which would encompass all the various things that we could put into the car with Q's assistance. We know what the script is, so we can invent the gadgets that suit us. There was the very exciting chase where he was taking on the whole of the Russian army, you know, tanks and what have you, and he always had a device on the car that would get him out of trouble.
We had the heads-up display in it with rockets and also the laser system, which was quite a good gag, I thought, with the larder.
What happened?
Salt corrosion.
We didn't use the ejector seat again, but we put extra things on, like skis that came down for when he's may find himself on the ice somewhere. Of course, you don't tip the audience off that that's what's going to happen, but it just so happens that he finds himself on a frozen lake and he's able to press a button and able to outmaneuver the opposition. In particular, wheels that described a hole in the ice. And of course, the opposition car goes onto the hole in the ice and sinks. And the Aston Martin, on several occasions, we almost lost it. It almost sank in the ice. You know, several times it broke, partially broke through the ice, and we had to drag it out quickly.
Time to leave.
We all had our hearts in our mouths every time a vehicle was going over somewhere where we knew was a bit suspect.
With the living daylights, Aston Martin seem to have regained their place in Bond's affections. But it would be a short-lived reunion. A lengthy legal dispute meant the next film wouldn't be made for 6 years. By then, Bond had another new face and his car another new badge.
Bond. James Bond.
In 1995, after a gap of 30 years, an Aston Martin DB5 was back in a Bond film, but only to establish new boy Pierce Brosnan at the beginning of GoldenEye. 3 decades earlier, the Bond team had to virtually beg for vehicles. But now, manufacturers were queuing up to cooperate, and the surprising announcement was that James Bond's next car would not be an Aston Martin.
Stop this car at once!
But a BMW.
We do quite a large amount of product placement, and this really was the cream of product placement. So we began a relationship with the Bond organisation with the Z3.
Right, now pay attention, 007.
It was the launch of the car, effectively. It was the first time the car had been seen.
All points radar.
British industry had fallen on hard times, really, and we had to go with a German manufacturer. What happens when we go around to make these stunt sequences with these cars, it's necessary to get a lot of cooperation from the manufacturer.
There was a huge enthusiasm for Bond within the BMW organisation. I think the chairman was a particular fan, which always helps.
The deal with BMW was done relatively late in the production of GoldenEye, which meant there was precious little time to film its involvement. And because BMW were determined that no one should see their new model before the release of the film, security was tight.
It was so under wraps at that time, you know, it was locked up by their technicians every night, and we weren't allowed to really do too much to it. It's pretty cosmetic.
We had the various kind of gadgets that were just shown, if you remember, in Q's workshop. So the involvement of the car was kind of minimal.
Now, this I'm particularly proud of. Behind the headlights, Stinger missiles.
Excellent. Just the thing for unwinding after a rough day at the office.
Need I remind you, 007, that you have a license to kill, not to break the traffic laws.
BMW mounted an intensive publicity campaign to establish the Z3 as a Bond car. The film was a big success, and BMW's faith in the power of the Bond brand had not been misplaced.
The resulting interest from the general public, the buying public, was enormous, and we ended up selling almost 300,000 Z3s. And this was the real kick-off, and the global exposure that James Bond can give you. And the massive interest there is right around the world means that a car that's launched globally, as the Z3 was, has an immediate recognition. The brand is already built right up.
For all the publicity surrounding the Z3 and GoldenEye, the car was only on screen for a few minutes, and disappointingly, hardly any of its gadgets were used. But BMW fans feeling short-changed only had to wait a couple of years before seeing what Bond and a Beamer could really do. .007's tricksy mobile phone in Tomorrow Never Dies must go down as one of the best Bond gadgets ever. BMW's flagship executive saloon, the 750iL, was stacked with so much Q-branch equipment it made the main car park sequence one of the best car chases for years.
Welcome. Please fasten seatbelt. Reduce speed. Pedestrians in roadway.
On Tomorrow Never Dies, we had the 7 Series BMWs, of which we had 16 of, and I don't think we sent any back in one piece. But we had to strip them out to be able to blind drive, i.e. laying on your back. The guy that was driving them, to lay on the floor, we'd extended the gear sticks, the steering wheel, all the pedals, all the controls, and he was laying flat on the floor with his head beneath the back seat, with just 3 screens above him, covered in black velvet, driving, reading off 3 screens which had lipstick cameras feeding views to them from the wing mirrors and the rear view mirror, which is very disorientating. And his biggest problem with the whole chase was motion sickness.
The length of time regarding the BMW things, it was, must have stretched probably over 4 or 5 months. All sorts of modifications, you know, even bullet impacts on windscreens and things like that, all had to be, you know, we had a whole factory full of spare windscreens, spare wings, spare lights, mirrors. It was a real, real stacked up, ready for any instance, really.
The big, boxy BMW was perhaps the least Bond-like car that Q ever offered 007. But for the next film, The World Is Not Enough, the German manufacturer came up with something that could have been created for the part. With a V8 engine and 400 horsepower, it was, of course, the wonderful Z8.
BMW very much wanted that to be the Bond car. You know, I think it was almost as if they built it to be the Bond car.
At that time, BMW only had 16 of them, of the prototypes, and they're all doing various things. And of course, you know, if they want us to use it, it was very difficult because we're in amongst their development program, and here we are trying to make a film.
Helps if you open the door.
We built, I think, 3 replica cars that were identical. I mean, obviously didn't have the same engines, but exterior-wise, they were identical.
We had a prototype body shell to take our moulds from, and then halfway through filming we started getting perfect cars through, but early on in the film it was just our kit car. It had to look perfect, and they were quite adamant it had to be 100-point perfect car, even the door shuts, the interior, the gaps, everything. It had to look like a real Z8.
You, go back. Leave. This area is closed.
I'm here to see Electric King. James Bond.
After a lot of toing and froing by various people to Munich and thereabouts, we did get all the bits and pieces that we wanted, and I think it was very successful the way it went.
I wanted to recreate, or at least in the audience's mind, try and recreate the remote control, because he sends a car around remote control in Tomorrow Never Dies. So on The World Is Not Enough, we sort of set the audience up when he's in trouble and he whistles the car up, beeps his remote control, this beautiful, sleek Z8 drives up, and then before he can get in it, we just split it right, well, he actually just gets in it, then we split it right down the middle. The audience think, oh God, they're getting repetitive again, and then we sort of change the tack again.
Q's not gonna like this.
Like the Z3 before it, the Z8's appearance in a Bond film had effectively launched the car to the world. But its role in The World Is Not Enough marked the end of BMW's three-picture deal, and the German manufacturer decided to move on. With BMW quite literally out of the picture, the Bond car has come full circle. Because in the 20th film, Die Another Day, James Bond drives an Aston Martin. We've seen how James Bond's love affair with Aston Martin began nearly 40 years ago. And even though along the way he's been unfaithful now and again, seduced by the charms of Lotus and BMW, you can't help feeling that 007 really only belongs in an Aston. And now he's got one, a £158,000 Aston Martin Vanquish for his latest film, Die Another Day.
Coming back to Aston Martin has been really exciting for us because it feels like we are again back with Bond having one of the top British cars. Now that it's part of Ford, it makes it possible for us to get the kind of cooperation we need in order to achieve the special effects we need to with these cars.
When we met everybody from the Ford Motor Group, all the kind of interested parties were there, Jaguar, Aston Martin, Volvo, they were all there. And, you know, it was a kind of a unilateral thing that they were interested in helping us again. And obviously, if Bond was going to have a car, it would be an Aston Martin.
James Bond and 007 and back in with Aston Martin, it's fantastic. I mean, we couldn't ask for a better opportunity for us.
The cars are very prominent because not only does Bond have his Aston Martin, but there's a Jaguar that the villain has. So there it's kind of a dueling of high-tech cars, which we haven't seen before.
Every film you do that's involving vehicles is invariably a chase, and my job and people like me, our biggest problem is getting something original.
The little spoke that he threw into it, the director, was that he felt he didn't just want another car chase, so he decided that he wanted it on ice. and hence we filmed most of the sequence in Iceland.
We were so lucky in finding a really, really visually spectacular location in Hoffen that I thought, well, I had a thought about it, and I thought I'd write it more like a ballet, so it's a visual feast for the audience, rather than spectacular crash, bang, explosions.
Once we decide on a car chase, then there are lots of people on the crew who contribute to the specific events in the car chase.
Normally we sit down, we go through it, and we try and decide how we can make it more spectacular. And you start bouncing ideas off of each other. And then once we've got a sort of rough outline of what we want to do with the car and where it's going to be done is when we start thinking about how many we need to do the various tricks and gadgets and things like that.
We've had to build 3 production cars, which for us, I mean, a car is a lot just for one car, but 3 production cars for what they call the hero cars. And then we've helped their engineers, who I have to say are a fantastic group of guys who've worked with our guys to produce 4 stunt cars.
And it was here, in the special effects workshop at Pinewood Studios, that each of the 4 Vanquishes and 4 Jaguar XKRs were transformed for their own individual roles. The team on Die Another Day had 8 months to turn the sports cars into stunt cars by making some essential modifications.
We spent £1.25 million making them 4-wheel drive, taking the V12s out and putting racing V8s and trannies in them and everything, and front drive axles, so they're actually 4-wheel drive, because I couldn't have done the chase without that.
We had the ability to cut holes in the dashboard and move things about. You know, you wouldn't want to drive on the roads with it, but it was perfectly suitable for what we wanted to do with the stunt.
It would have been nice to have built a prototype, tested it to death, and then gone, well, we'll build 8 of those. But we didn't have that luxury. We had to start building 8 cars and test the first one we finished, and then change anything that didn't work. So the pressure was on all the time. We had this definite window of a frozen lake in this month or whatever. It had to be done in that time, or otherwise it was a complete waste of money. In the end, everything went by boat to Iceland. It was 15 containers, I think, purely of car equipment. When we got there, it was appalling. You couldn't even stand up. You couldn't see. It was just a total whiteout blizzard, and it was just a survival issue to start with. We didn't know how we were going to survive up there, let alone film anything. When we first ran the cars, we were bringing them back into the workshop at night, and they would freeze solid, so the whole axle, the calipers, the wheels were full of snow. They were frozen to the floor, actually. We couldn't actually move them.
But just keeping the cars going was only one of the problems.
The ice wasn't really as thick as we wanted it. We then decided to put inflation bags in all the cars. So, you know, God forbid if somebody did go through the ice, you wouldn't last long if, you know, it was 1,000 foot deep.
That made us scratch our heads a bit in case it went through the ice. It's got to float, and that was only about a week before we left.
We do try to be different. And we're always striving to kind of come up with things that have never, ever been attempted before. And it's very difficult. There's a lot of competition out there.
Each Bond film needs to be bigger and more spectacular than the last. So the pressure is always on to improve 007's options list and create ever more outrageous gadgetry.
We can have machine guns, which will fire. And we can put out a set of rockets, which will fire pyrotechnically. That's his sort of forward-firing lower arsenal, if you like, and the forward-firing or all directions firing upper arsenal are the close-in weapon support guns, which are sort of self-seeking, and they're obviously meant to fire, shoot anything out of the scope.
For the very first time, the baddie's got gadgets as well, and he's got twice as many of them. There are rockets in the front, rockets in both side doors, a lethal Gatling gun in the back, And grenade launchers in the boot.
Yeah, I think it's a natural progression for Bond. He's always been known for his gadgets, and I guess the baddie underworld is now catching on, and they're getting their fair share of weapons. And I think the whole uniqueness about the chase is that Bond has his weapons, the baddie has his weapons, and in fact they equal each other out.
After several weeks filming on the frozen lake for the main driving sequence, the Bond crew returned to the UK to complete the remainder of the chase and all the detailed stunt work. Back home, they choreographed the scenes in which the cars continue their duel inside the villain's ice palace and picked up the main action shots for one of the most demanding stunts in the film.
One particular time, Bond finds himself sliding along upside down in his car. He then uses his ejector seat to right the car and then drive off unscathed. Well, he might be, but these won't be, so getting him upside down is going to cost a couple of Astons, I think, and getting him the right way up will probably cost a couple more.
They burst into the interior of this ice palace, and so it's the two cars, the Vanquish preceding the Jaguar, smashing into the ice palace.
It wasn't just simply a case of bursting into it. He had to actually ram two skidoos that were in the way, so we had to do a nifty little rig to make sure they got out of the way, because they're not the lightest of things to start ramming.
The Ice Palace chase, that was never envisaged first off. That grew up, and the set has been modified, strengthened to make a chase that you could film contiguously if you wanted to. And it's very helpful, you know, with action unit director, that we don't have to keep cutting and doing this bit there, that bit there, you know, and you can get this continuous flow of movement.
The end of the sequence, having done a whole chase inside the ice palace, it'll burst out through the wall and do, like, we've measured out about a 50-foot jump. We've got a double pipe ramp, so it'll jump about 50 foot, and hopefully you don't bend it too much.
Going through the wall coming out, we had to give certain protection to the stunt driver, because he didn't have the protection of an ordinary windscreen. So yeah, we put special screens in.
We put in a 10mm mackerel screen that's bolted in so none of the debris can actually get to him. We've got runners under the car to protect the underside of the car when he runs up the tube ramp, and we've raised the car slightly just to help it on its way. And for him inside, we've rolled the seat back so he's laying down, 5-point harness. It just makes it easier for him when the car, if we do have a very heavy landing, then it's not going to jar his back or anything like that. He's strapped in wearing a hat and everything's padded that we can pad, so hopefully he'll be safe.
Conditions had to be perfect before the 5 cameras used to capture the stunt could roll. Extra sacks of fake snow were laid to cushion the car's landing. Then it was simply a case of watching and waiting until the stunt driver decided that the time was right. Only then would he go for it. Although both the film set and the Vanquish took a bit of a beating, the end result, even by Bond standards, is truly spectacular. When it comes to creating awesome stunts with real cars, the Bond team have consistently led the way for the past 4 decades. And it really can be said that nobody does it better.
And Tiff Needell's back with the rest of the team for Fifth Gear tomorrow night at 8:30 on 5. Well, there's no stunt driving coming up next, and even Bond would want to get out of the way for this lot. Britain's worst drivers get behind the wheel next.